I have a few things to add.
For fuck's sake.
For fuck's sake.
Yeah, I know. This is sort of unusual. I'm not exactly sure how into the future a part 2 scenario would fit into the overall production. But anyway, I strangely I received an email about a podcaster newsletter type thing. Newsletters are cool now, by the way. And it basically said, if you have an idea for a podcast episode or series or a general topic, don't try to fit it all into one episode. So I did do that with I'd been pondering the nature of this change the world, and which I've labeled Delivering Big Delta, which again is a play on the Delivering Happiness title of the Tony Hsieh book. And I didn't really touch on how that really fits into this. I don't want to sound like I'm harping on that, but it is something that I kind of watched unfold. It was in my backyard, so to speak, while I was in town. When I moved to Las Vegas, it was just sort of getting moving in earnest, and I kind of watched it. I was friends with many people there, so that's going to be sort of the prototypical creative thought, visionary. Let's change the world. Let's change how things work, and then how things went. And I do not want to harp on Tony Hsieh himself, because obviously the way things turned out for Tony, not good, and it's unfortunate. But the project itself, the downtown project, the Vegas Tech Fund, the way it unfolded, the way things proceeded for the people who participated and whatnot, that's, I think, fair game. So, but anyway, I did, so there were just the way that I assembled the episode, it seemed a little haphazard to me, and rather than trying to cover everything in the space of about an hour by myself without a conversation, this will be part 2, and then again we are leading into what I hope will be an interesting topic arc, because I think people throw the change the world phrase, or let's make the world a better place, or the old visualize world peace was a good one. Be the change you want to be is the fake meme. Well, it's not fake, but it's misattributed, I suppose. So I had read these books, which I mentioned, and again, there are show notes. And I mean, again, I've mentioned this in the previous episode, and the new thing for my various podcasts is show notes published outside of the podcast RSS feed limitations, I guess. So there's a show notes for part 1, just delivering Big Delta without the 1. And so there's a list of books, there's a couple of YouTube videos, and so the books basically kind of planted a few seeds for thinking moving forward about what impact the idea that somebody wants to change the world, what impact does that really have on said world? I would like to change the world by having a better way to record podcasts. Is that really changing the world? I would like to have a better way to provide clean water to people. That will change the world. Well, that's probably an actual change, but unleashing software on a community of people that have a particular need because they want to accomplish their own goals, that's like a different notion. And so Yuval Harari, the author, is a very opinionated historian in his writings, but it was an interesting way of, as he assembled his telling of the story of the history of humankind and how, I mean, the world did change over the course of our history. And he makes a point of highlighting how humanity has outpaced evolution, and that's why species are extinct, because they can't evolve as quickly as we are. Steve Jobs has the bicycle metaphor, which I always thought was interesting. Humans on 2 feet are not particularly efficient, but when you put them on a bicycle, they outperform everything on the planet from an efficiency standpoint. So yeah, humans and their ingenuity, and if you look at the biology of humanity, the way that humans can adapt. Get some water here. The way the humans can adapt to things. The fact that humans are born so incapable of surviving in the wild means that, or I guess the upside of that is that they can adapt. That's the theory anyway, that they can adapt to surroundings. They are absorbing knowledge like a sponge, all these imagined realities, right? All the culture, society, everything that is outside of the sort of built-in interaction that you might like the socialization of a baby human versus a lesser primate, or assuming that we are at the top of the heap. But yeah, just the potential for adaptation and just learning. I mean, that is the strength of humanity, allegedly, for better or worse. So on reading these things, I was starting to reflect, because I did begin this podcast. This entire show is about, the tagline may not spell this out specifically enough, but it's what works, what doesn't, and what can we do about it. And the notion I kind of had in my mind, and hence the title, was that you hear about a problem or the way a system is functioning. It may not be great. And so you might react with as the Irish would say, FFS. And they'd spell that out. But then what comes next is, well, we can complain about it all day, but what would we do? And you might say, to change the world. And you can certainly watch the news and hear all about lead in the water and fighting in the streets. And obviously, we just got over a pandemic. So where does this fit into the changing of the world, and what does it mean to change the world, and how do we make gestures in those directions, whether it's an objective reality, and that's where the physics discussions come in, and I will include pandemics, so we'll get to that in a second, or the imagined realities, which are things like economies, and how do we put money in people's pockets because they haven't been working, right? The economy is a set of rules that we've all agreed on. We agree on the value of a dollar, or RMB, if I'm saying that correctly, RMB, or a ruble, or a euro, or whatever, right? We agree on the value of that. We agree on the rules of how exchange works, exchanging those for goods and services. An objective reality is people need to eat because that's how biology works. They need to consume calories and nutrients. And then the imagined reality as well. That bushel of wheat that you have grown is worth this many of these pieces of paper. Right? So those, they mix at some point. And so the physics discussion, I think I mentioned Sabine Hassenfelder. It's interesting that she, as the curmudgeon, as Eric Weinstein points out in the interview I linked to in the notes, by the way, so I'm linking to the previous show notes, so I don't have to send all that stuff out. Check the show notes now, and it'll link to those. So the curmudgeon is offering a reasoned and competent critique as well. If you've ever done the math for a driven damped harmonic oscillator, right? Having some damping, having a load to drive impacts the system, right? So if the system includes critique that is reasoned and competent, then the system itself can function in like a predictable or a balanced way, and hopefully the system advances itself, so to speak, so that a discussion of the theory of everything, whether it's Stephen Wolfram on his computation model and his view on physics, or Eric Weinstein's geometric unity, or string theory, or M theory, or fluidic gravity? No, I don't even remember. I'm not a physicist. What can I say? But I watch these things, or I listen to them, or I read them, and it's very interesting to me. But the casual person is not qualified to participate outside of, I mean, if you are qualified, then you jump in and you participate, or you have other discussions. But some of us are interested but not qualified, right? So, and I found it interesting that kind of conversation, because not everyone is feeling the effects of the many worlds theory of quantum, right? Is a wave function collapsing right now? Probably. Am I being able to describe what just happened because of it? Absolutely not. So day to day, we don't really feel that. Now, if you look at a different kind of scientific discussion, which happened very much in the open across the globe about this pandemic we just got through, well, there, suddenly everyone became an expert. And the world most definitely did change. So how does anyone convince humanity, and a few pets here and there, apparently, cats, dogs, bats, your pet, what is it, pangolin? How do you convince the world that the objective reality that a novel coronavirus is not like the flu? It does have a particular fatality rate, without some sort of vaccination or other protection, whatever the small fatality rate is, without some way to stop it. Well, like the drip in your sink, eventually that sink fills up, right? So how do you convey that point to a population that is so used to imagined realities flying at them from social media, from alternate news media, from whatever you want to call the real news media now? Everybody's got their take. Everything is highly politicized. Politics is an imagined reality, right? Political parties, those are an invention, just like economies and money and governments and corporations and all these things are rules that we agree to, and we pick a side, and we adopt a belief, and we have our friends, right? As social animals, we have others that reinforce those beliefs. And so changing those beliefs, i.e., hey, wear a mask. No, that's infringing my freedoms, but it also reduces transmission. Let me explain the SIR model to you. No, I don't want to hear you because I agree with the other person that told me that this is just like the flu and the fatality rate is nearly zero, and things like this. So changing the world in the short term is a rather substantial challenge when you are fighting these imagined realities and the actions and the attitudes and the overall views that they promote or enable or Foment is a good word, perhaps. So how do you change the world in that circumstance? Well, we saw that it's an uphill battle, to be sure. And even today, as I'm recording part 2 of Delivering Big Delta, we are getting all sorts of reporting of some sort about lab leaks or original sources. And there again, there's an objective reality, right? How did a virus transmit? Maybe the zoonotic transfer from animal to human. Maybe it transferred into a place and then out of that place when people got sick. Can you blame that place as the source, or is it merely a point of concentration that led to a larger exposure, right? A larger number of people exposed because of the way it's spread. Anyway, all conjecture, right? Not even that, right? Pure speculation. So how can you change the attitude of the world when there's so much noise? And then, by the way, that's another book I'm going to read. The author of Noise is in the video, one of the videos in the show notes. So how can you get over the noise, the cacophony, which is only getting louder now with social media and silly podcasts like this, and affect actual change to the imagined reality insofar as it impacts the objective reality, which is actual virus getting into actual humans and actually killing some of them. So that's a challenge. So physics and pure science and research and the scientific method and as far as the peer review process works, which there's much debate about the walled gardens and the cliques and the other drama in there, and I know nothing about that because that's not where I go. But we can imagine that imagined reality has some impact on our understanding of objective reality. And then we have things like our economy, right? We have people getting back to work, or maybe the argument that extended unemployment benefits are preventing people from getting back to work. I'm coming at you from Las Vegas, where there's a labor shortage, which is being blamed on, paying people to not work, which one could argue is really just introducing a competitive element to the market rate, right? It's an artificial, or it's an alternative way to raise a minimum wage, right? So the business model of businesses that cannot afford to pay people a wage that actually makes them able to function in society, in our imagine. I'll stop using those words, but that's a challenge, right? And how do you react to that changing of the world? Because from that perspective, if you compare it to something like changing the understanding of the way relativity and quantum mechanics can be modeled together to better understand the way the universe works and how we can travel through it, for example, or how the pandemic, the most recent pandemic, and other biological issues along those lines, how they move, how they kill, how they can be stopped. Well, then you take something like, hey, let's introduce a capital injection into the economy as the stimulus program to protect people from losing their homes, being homeless, losing out on opportunities to eat and survive. So as a way to recover from the short-term impact, the 1 year of utter chaos. And if you're a Mark Blythe fan, you know that he describes the American economy as a Mustang. So when a Mustang is wide open on the drag strip, it's flying. When you when it stops, and America's economy was he likens to that. It's built for speed, not for stop and go traffic. Whereas, say, Europe, with their backstopping of payrolls and government funding flowing through the banking system, basically people kept getting their paychecks, and America had a different model. So when you change the world from that perspective, the government, the federal government in the United States introduces a substantial change in the way things operate in the short term. Infrastructure bills, child support payments, extended unemployment, these are all like emergency measures, but they have a substantial world-changing effect, and the consequences of those are being felt in some ways. Is that the reason people aren't running back to work for $7.25 an hour or $12 an hour, or for something plus tips, or whatever the case may be? Possibly. Is it a realization that people need to reassess and maybe do something else? Maybe they weren't happy where they were, and this is an opportunity to regroup and to reorganize and to re-examine what one wants to do. Is it a case for universal basic income? Maybe not. Is it a case for living a better life? Perhaps. So this was a world change from several perspectives. Public health, physically, from people getting sick, and mentally, from people deciding what they want to do after being stuck at home or facing the unusual circumstance of social distancing, masks, the possibility of exposure and eventual infection, possibly. So definitely changing the world. So when I hear change the world, on the one hand, you think, oh, yes, build a new social network, or build a piece of software that enables this or that, or build a new computer desk that does something more than going up or down. I'll get to those another time. But changing the world has a lot of different meanings, and I found that interesting. And by the way, I think I did mention the microservices presentation by, I don't have his name in front of me, apologies. It's in the show notes. The microservices are interesting to me because a lot of discussion is taking place, and they are, is it Conway's rule, right? Computer software or system evolves to...
software, a set of either published or unpublished machine intelligible instructions for a specific purpose.
You got to love Alexa.
Associated documentation.
So, Alexa, I have a smart speaker product. I actually have two, and another one might start talking just now. Microservices, Conway's law, Conway's rule. So microservices are interesting because they suggest, or the proponents of microservices suggest, that you can break services up into these small services that operate independently and interact with each other in whatever way, gRPC or other. They isolate their data, they isolate concerns, and they communicate in a structured way but independently with some failover potential, and that way your community of services can survive downtime or an onslaught of user traffic and whatnot. And I find it interesting because this is a change the world sort of effort that people get to test out in these large-scale computer systems. Netflix is a big one, right? You see Netflix in many conferences offering presentations about how they scale up and how they scale out and how they've implemented microservices that are redundant and take over this and that and share data over here and so on. And there are several other approaches. And the one I linked to I thought was very interesting because it was excessively structured and specific, which I thought was interesting. And it's an approach that I kind of appreciate in some of this stuff I'm working on myself. So I thought that was a nice example. But the bottom line there is, if you can change the world in that, if your pitch is we want to change the world, and you can present something like that presentation where you say, this is how the world functions, and here's what we're going to do to change it and whatnot. So offer a fairly detailed view of this change the world idea. And I think that is, that would be good and useful. And that probably works better in an objective reality, if I could use that one more time. You know, if you want to talk about physics, or if you want to talk about the logistics of vaccine manufacture, distribution after you've done the testing. So these processes exist, and they can be examined and they can be measured. You know, how many vaccines are produced, how many are being distributed, how many are failing, like they expire for whatever reason. That is like because of the temperature and handling rules and whatnot. And then what's the impact on transmission as people are vaccinated? These are all measurable things, regardless of the belief systems in place or how you view the cost of the vaccinations, the different components, the manufacturer, the distribution, the actual on the ground, at the points of distribution, pods. Those are accounting entries, right? It's the science part is, that's make or break. That's live or die kind of stuff. It's kind of interesting. So I found the microservices view kind of an interesting take on systems, because ultimately, if you want to change the world, you're going to be impacting at least one system somewhere. And if you can break it down into, factor it into some sort of equivalent of the microservices argument or presentation in general, then you might get some converts. So now, if we go back to the downtown project, I didn't really get onto the Kingdom of Happiness, the Amy Groth book. I did read, or rather the audiobook from Tony Hsieh, The Delivering Happiness, read in his voice, which was interesting. I mean, he read it, he narrated it. And his view was certainly admirable. It was empowering people and providing a good product and making people happy. And there have been many tales told about Zappos customer service. I think he gives an example there where he or somebody he was with in some city called Zappos support and asked them for help in finding a pizza place, I think it was, as an example of how they're willing to, stop at nothing to help the customers. And that's fine. That's kind of cool. I think it's rare to find, in general, in my travels, it's rare to find someone who's willing to go quite that far. If you just pick up the phone and call, first of all, if you pick up the phone and call a person, that's a rarity in itself, right? So he certainly did some interesting things at the company level. I think that's not uniquely American, but it's certainly in the last 20, 30 years has been definitely American to, the entrepreneurial spirit to start doing something in a new way and arguably changing the world, but introducing, a new paradigm. The lexicon of change. So there were some interesting things in that book about Zappos, but when it became city scale and the introduction of holacracy, which I did touch on, and I did read that book by Brian Robertson, was it? Again, in the notes. I didn't want to read notes, so I've already published them. So, holacracy is a bit of a slog if you are not familiar with complicated protocols. The structure is reasonably simple, but the protocols are maybe overdefined, and while they are meant to be extensible and reworkable, you're already getting into weird territory, because here you're changing this imagined reality about how, I know I'm using the reality words again, sorry. You're saying to someone entering, say, the Zappos employee population, here's how we are going to interoperate between, yourself and the people around you on different tasks and projects and these circles, and you raise a concern or a tension and these things. Now extend that out to city scale, where you're working across different groups of people with different backgrounds and different goals and different expectations. And this did not extend to the companies that were funded, as far as I know. But I think expectations, getting back to my last mile assertion, I think that last mile left a lot of people wondering what was going on. And so the visionary, change the world, we're going to do things a different way, had a rippling impact that left a lot of people confused or incapacitated from the perspective of, getting their startup moving, being productive in their job if they were working for the downtown project, or some variation or mix of those things. So if you do read, as I did, The Kingdom of Happiness, which is about the Zapponian utopia that Tony Hsieh conceived and almost implemented in downtown Las Vegas, there were many tales, and that book particularly interesting to me because many of the names, people named by name in the book, are people I knew and I met fairly early. The return on community, Andy, I know Andy. When Maggie arrived in town, I met her on the night that she arrived. She still had her carry-on luggage, that the drag bag that she got out of a taxi, I guess, and walked into this place. I think it was after the downtown podcast, and she walked in with her luggage. Said, "Hi, my name is Maggie. I just moved here." So she figures prominently in the book. The downtown podcast people, so on and so. There are many characters in Amy's story, The Kingdom of Happiness, where I knew them. And so to read through that book, you see how several hopes and dreams didn't really materialize. And I think, my opinion, and something I would love to talk about in future episodes, is that the pitch to change the world, to do things differently, as opposed to doing things different, thinking different is a whole different story. But I think the pitch that was offered to people, and then the execution of the implementation of the downtown project, the Vegas Tech Fund, the return on community, the serendipitous collisions, all these things sounded great. But the impact of that effort was not quite, I think, what people hoped for, maybe including the inner circle. And I didn't really know those people. So I think changing the world, it's an easy statement to make. I think the question is, what's the metric? What is, to be clinical, how do I know I'm changing the world? Like, what am I hoping to change? And then what do I actually change? And then perhaps most important, what comes of it? And maybe it's because I'm getting older, as are you. But at some point you have to wonder, like, and I come from the Silicon Valley days. I moved to Silicon Valley in 93. It was at the end of the Bush 41 recession, the new Clinton economy, and all of the chaos that it would bring after was unfolding. And Al Gore invented the internets. And I moved to Silicon Valley, and I had always heard about this place. I lived in Sunnyvale, and from war games. I moved to Sunnyvale, and I still remember as if it were yesterday, walking to the post office, which was about 2 blocks from the apartment I was living in. And as I walked down another street, there was Sun Microsystems. Oh, and so on. Like, you're just seeing all these companies, and then there's Apple right down the street in Cupertino. A little bit longer walk, but so to be immersed in this city of change at that time was very interesting. But look, and certainly changing of the world, no question about it. The internet and various pieces of technology, big tech as it's known today, no question. The world is a very different place now. What has become of that? That's a great question that I'm sure will be the subject of many books long into the future. Like how, like it'll be. The Gutenberg press was, barely a flicker of light, and big tech has been a solar flare blasting humanity, shining light on the good and the bad. So I just found it interesting in reading all this stuff, comparing it to what I witnessed and what I sort of my notions, how I viewed what unfolded here when I moved here, and what I heard from people, and what I after the fact, and so on. And how, so as a prototype, like I said, how does the downtown project retrospectively, and if possible by actually after the fact, an after action, a postmortem. That is not a reference to Tony, so don't even go there. But a postmortem on the individual experiences of the participants in the downtown project who moved here with high hopes and some funding, and their experiences, and then in most cases that I'm aware of, eventual moving on to somewhere else. And in my own travels, my hopes and dreams to change the world, so to speak, I used to think, how can I come up with I used to just chase stock options, which over time I learned is, there are people that have done quite well by going to where the options are and sticking around until they go public or until they become valuable, sell them off, leave, on to the next one. I've always had a stronger desire to build something, which means I'm not rich. But I think the question is, do you do something to get rich, or do you do something that has real impact? And as a result, you end up doing okay. And if we look at some of the headlines lately, just in America, with the Melinda French Gates and Bill Gates divorce will shine some light on some things that I'm sure will be unsettling. I was never a Bill Gates fan. Then I kind of said, well, he's spending all this money that he got on this foundation and making the world a better place. And then you look at the Oxford AstraZeneca situation and the vaccine patents, and the foundation CEO turned around and is supportive of lifting the patent limitations and whatnot, but the vaccine should not be protected by patents in these circumstances, especially because the risk was socialized. But that's another podcast. Those are imagined realities creeping in on our objective realities. But some of those attitudes make me wonder about Bill Gates, as a human. I was never a fan, but how do things like that, where once you start looking into what's really happening, aside from the press releases and the public speeches and the TED Talks, same with, Amazon changed the world. It's changed the way people shop and buy things and conduct commerce and all these criticalities, right? Like, can I get my iPhone case tomorrow instead of next week? Can I get it delivered with some, let me think of some popcorn. Let me get some popcorn kernels and an iPhone case and get them tomorrow, and they will be delivered in 2 separate boxes from different sides of the country the next day in 2 different vehicles. And is that really changing the world, or is that something else? And so vast amounts of money and shifting of riches and wealth and questions about capitalism and socialism and all these big questions arise from these world-changing endeavors. And I find that fascinating. And I hope you do too. So this is, as I mentioned in the part 1, this is getting at the crux of why I wanted to do this podcast in general, the entire show, the name, even though FFS doesn't suggest this. It is literally, rather than complaining, it is a structured look at systemic change, examining what's working, what isn't. If someone were to come on this show and we'd had an episode discussing the downtown project, for example, to revisit that again, we could discuss their perspective on, how did it work for them, what did work, what didn't. Because the notion, I just saw a headline yesterday, which I will not share because it's just hype, but it was essentially how to find the next Silicon Valley. So I would wonder if that's a good thing to look for or not. But the notion of the smart city, the startup city, the city as a startup, which Andy White is still a proponent of, but these idea of tech centers in the context of the new work from home culture that established itself over the last year. Work from anywhere is yet a new, on top of work from home, work from anywhere. The notion of paying people regardless of their geographic location, which will change the landscape of local economies, no doubt. I had a friend who worked for Apple in academic sales, I think it was, living in Houston. And I'll never forget it because I was a young whippersnapper at the time. I think this was like 95, 96. And he says, I was paying 3% of my salary to my mortgage in Houston. Why? Because he was being paid by Apple as though he lived in Cupertino. So when you introduce salaries, regardless of cost of living, you shift quality of life for some people. So if I were going to make the same salary regardless, should I live in San Francisco or should I live here in Las Vegas or should I live in Houston or should I live somewhere else entirely? Do I have to stay in the country? Can I go somewhere where the dollar is stronger? Speaking of imagined realities. So I think there's a lot to consider. Anyone who's come out of our 2020 year of reflection and growing potatoes, I've said that joke before because I have been home solo and I just work. I talk to myself, listen to disco music, and maybe you did the same. But if you've not entered 2021 thinking what could be done differently, then maybe you missed out. I'm not sure, but I certainly have. And at the end of the day or the beginning of the next day, that is going to figure prominently into the FFS Talk podcast. And so I just wanted to revisit this topic. And surely there will be more to say. But rather than trying to pack it all into one episode by myself, I would much rather have this discussion with you or others. And so I'm hoping to cast a wide net into the future and have topic arcs on interesting topics with different viewpoints and work through, as the tagline says, what works and what doesn't, and what we can do about it. So I will cut it short today. It's less than an hour, and I will have gone through and edited out the interjection. I think someday I will do an entire episode of something, probably the Quaggling Sand podcast, with interactions with my smart speaker products from the A company. But sometimes interjections without warrant. Yeah, whatever. Now it's not, I turned off the mic, so it's not reacting. Anyway, I thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to part 2. If you did hear part 1, it's not necessarily bad. I just sounded like, I think I was less structured than I wanted to be, which is fine because I'm not reading a script. I really would rather talk about these topic arcs with knowledgeable people, interested and interesting people in having these discussions, and involve you and other listeners and live stream, etc. Use all the tools. So more speech is better and more discussion is better. And to be honest, the whole physics interaction, that the one video I've included, was interesting. There are several of those types of discussions. Sabina Hassenfelder is a character. And I think having a critic who is critical and honest, but also qualified and thoughtful and reasoned, is almost invaluable. And I think it would have been nice if the Downtown Project, to go back to that, would have had those sorts of critics so that everything wasn't amazing and life-changing and visionary and socialist, if you believe Tucker Carlson, which I don't, that's not true. But so I think having a critical eye or a critical voice can be invaluable, and it will ultimately make for better world-changing efforts, especially if we examine potential impact of these changes. So again, thank you for listening, and do check out the show notes, which are in newsletter form on Substack, ffstalk.substack.com. A link to that is in the RSS feed for this podcast, and there's a link back to the show from the show notes, so eventually everything will be all cross-linked, and you'll be able to click anywhere and find what you're looking for. And then eventually you will join the discussion. Thank you again. Good day.